Hello, my name is Simon Double, and welcome to Inside the Rails, a monthly podcast for horse racing enthusiasts everywhere. And I'm joined as ever by Phil Boyle from ITV Racing. Hi Phil, how are you?
Hi Simon, very well thanks, and looking forward to recording another podcast.
Well, we'll be joined yet again by another prominent broadcaster, Rishi Persad, later on, following recent guests Francesca Cumani and Frankie Foster. In fact, no sooner had you joked about trying to follow Francesca and Frankie with another Frankie Dettori, the world's most famous jockey still riding, and he announces his retirement and a farewell tour.
He did, yeah, and I think it's great that Frankie's doing things that way. It does mean he might not have time for an Inside the Rails appearance, unfortunately, but hopefully it'll be a big celebration of a great career and it'll get racing into the news for all the right reasons.
Yes, it will seem strange, won't it, next year not having Frankie riding, but all good things come to an end, unlike a couple of not-so-good news stories which seem to be rumbling on recently. Changes to the whip rules and a recent bloodstock scandal. Thoughts on the whip issue, where racing's authorities have done a U-turn on how jockeys can use the whip, Phil?
I mean, much as I think it's a good thing that we can debate and find solutions that satisfy people when there's a problem. But yeah, it was all a bit of a mess, wasn't it? There were two senior jockeys who were involved in the original proposals. And I think from my point of view, I'd hope that their colleagues would have input into that to them and would have realised it was important, got the feedback in early, and we'd have avoided a lot of unwanted headlines when we needed to make changes down the line.
Yes, well, my view is I think the whip debate has become somewhat tedious, so I'll move on to the bloodstock story, where an owner has apparently spent £20 million at the yearling sales, but not paid for the horses.
Indeed, yeah, another story that probably shouldn't have ever happened. Yeah, I can't understand how someone can be allowed to spend, and I say that reservedly, £20 million that they don't apparently intend to pay. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of people that paid too much for their horses at those sales. The price would have been run up by bids from this individual, and yeah, I'm guessing they must be very disappointed, even angry about that. You know, let's hope some lessons are learned by the sales companies to reduce the risk of anything like this happening again in the future.
I would just add, Phil, that, look, if you or I didn't pay our bills for horses purchased, and we're not spending anything like that sort of money, the auction houses would be, on us like a ton of bricks, wouldn't they? So, I think at the very least they need to re-examine their due diligence procedures. Anyway, let's move on to your recent acquisition, Sajwan, and his first race for ITV Racing.
Indeed, yeah, he ran at Kempton, and I think the summary is we messed up the tactics.
All right, okay.
Yeah, he's led in his two previous races before we bought him, but he got passed in the last strides in the last one of those two by a couple of horses he was meeting again in this race.
Okay.
And we thought that trying to relax him in behind the others would just give him a little bit of a better chance to be stronger at the finish. We tried those tactics, but they didn't work at all. Tried to pull his way to the front early in the race, and he used up way too much energy doing that, and he dropped away in the home straight. The two rivals I mentioned before were first and fourth, so the form of that race, he should have been right in the mix, but that just made it even more of a disappointment. But I guess lesson learned, and hopefully he'll have run again and run better by the time listeners hear this, because he's due to go again at the end of this week.
Yes, look, riding tactics are so crucial in a race, aren't they? But what about this rising star that you booked to ride Sajwan, Billy Loughnane, who's already ridden over 20 winners since his first winner, Swiss Row, at the end of November last year?
Yes, what an impressive young man he is. I really think he could go right to the top. He's only 16, and yet he was happy to discuss the race with 20 odd of my shareholders. He provided us with a detailed account of what happened and what he felt we could do to ensure a better result next time. And yeah, everyone was really impressed with him. I just wish I'd been that assured and eloquent when I was his age.
He does look very relaxed, both on and off a horse, that's for sure. Look, there are plenty of good young riders around, and I have one under wraps for later in the year. So watch, or rather listen, to this space.
I shall. And yes, there's some good riders. I hope we're hearing about them for years to come. And if so, let's hope we can say we saw the potential at an early stage. That'd be great, wouldn't it? Now, we're recording this the day after the Lingfield Winter Million weekend. I know you had 2 runners there on Saturday. Tell us how they got on.
Yes, Sharp Distinction and Dancing in the Woods both ran at Lingfield. We went there for the good prize money that they were putting on offer. They were 6th and 3rd respectively. Sharp, it wasn't quite so sharp on Saturday. He didn't run badly, but he was outpaced in the final furlong. He'll have a short winter break now, he deserves that, before coming back for the new turf season on the 1st of April. Woody ran another great race on the all-weather, picked up over £2,000 for coming 3rd, so his owners were absolutely delighted. He ran rather freely early on in the race, but he ran well to make it a win, a 2nd and 2 thirds in just 4 starts on the all-weather. Trainer Amy Murphy had 4 runners that day, all Syndicate horses, and she had a 4th, a 3rd and a 2nd, just beaten ahead, the last one. It was a really enjoyable day, so well done Lingfield Park.
Sounds good, yes. And when Sajwan ran, we were at Kempton. We were brilliantly looked after there. They provided us with cheap access to a box for our group, and yeah, that experience definitely softened the blow of the result. It's good to see a few more courses trying to give a good experience to larger groups of owners, and I know that Arena Racing, who run Lingfield, are aiming to have Syndicate owner lounges at all their tracks in the future. So, did you see that on Saturday? How many people did you have there, and how was your experience?
Well, there were about 15 of us across the 2 syndicates, and we all had a lovely lunch in the owners and trainers, which was a really good sized area. Sometimes they're a little bit pokey, but this was a good area. And the newly refurbished syndicates lounge at Lingfield was excellent. Nicely decked out, comfy chairs, a good sized bar and a tote facility. It was empty when I first had a look late morning. I think I was the first guest in there, but later on Amy's Racing to Profit owners went in there and Solaria Racing's owners joined them after Golden Mayflower nearly won the lucky last. She was the one that was 2nd, very fast finishing filly she was that day. It was lovely to meet the racing managers, Josh and Jay, and Solaria Racing may well end up doing some joint hospitality at Amy's yard later in the year, possibly with Eclipse Sports Promotions as well. So you see, syndicates can work together. And what a successful time syndicates have had recently on the track, Phil.
They really have, indeed. Marie's Rock, of course, won the Cheltenham New Year's Day race for Midland Park. She looks a big player for the Mayor's Hurdle at Cheltenham, and that's got the potential to be the syndicate race of the festival in March, because Marie's Rock and the Noel Feely Racing Syndicate's horse Love Envoi are currently 1st and 2nd favourites. So, yeah, there's a good chance of a syndicate winner there. The latter, Love Envoi, won at Sandown a couple of weeks ago, and the syndicate had a great day because they also had Tamurus win a big novice hurdle on the same card. So, yeah, that was great to see on TV. And there was another syndicate in the news when Diamond Racing won the Classic Chase at Warwick with their horse I Will Do It. So it's been great to see all the syndicate winners at the moment, and it does show that through shared ownership we're all capable of living the dream of success on the biggest stages.
Hear to that. And horse-wise, Phil, what's caught your eye recently?
Yeah, we recorded the January podcast before Christmas, so we haven't had a chance to mention Brave Man's Game and Constitution Hill, who both won at Kempton on Boxing Day. That was 2 brilliant performances from 2 great horses. L'Homme Pressé was booked for 2nd behind Brave Man's Game when he fell at the last, and in doing so not only cost his owners the prize money from that race, but also the chance to run in this season's Gold Cup, which is very sad, but hopefully he'll give them some great days at the races when he recovers. We had Old Paisley Park winning again, which will have brought a tear to the eye of many people.
Yes.
I wonder if he's got more in store for us all to cheer later in the season. That'd be great. And at the opposite end of the spectrum, from the older horses to the younger ones, we had another win for Facile Vega, who looks a brilliant novice hurdler. But then again, so does the Paul Nicholls trained Hermes Alen, who won the Challow Hurdle at Newbury. A future clash between those two would be pretty special, but they might well run at different distances at the Cheltenham Festival, so we might have to wait for that. But we should get a clash in the Arkle between Dysart Dynamo, who was really impressive in a novice chase in Ireland, and Nicky Henderson's John Bon. And if that happens, that'd be quite a mouth-watering prospect. And of course, no roundup of the last month would be complete without a mention of the 3 mile handicap chase at Kempton on the 27th of December. I'm thinking most people might not remember it, but the current favourite for the Ultimate Chase at Cheltenham, and one of the favourite horses of someone I know quite well, was the winner of that race. It was a David Pipe trained remastered.
Yeah, so it was a lovely performance, and if you remember, Phil, he sort of nearly reared up and whipped round at the start. He normally likes to front run this horse, but one of my favourite horses in training, deservedly winning a big one. Yeah, it was lovely to see. Now, anything else that's caught your eye before Rishi Persad joins us?
We ought to mention a return to race riding for Davy Russell. He retired recently, but wasn't out very long. Unfortunately, poor Jack Kennedy has suffered a broken leg, and Davy was persuaded to return to riding as cover for him. It seems like Davy's nearly as old as me. That might be a bit of an exaggeration. But it does go to show how hardy these jump jockeys are. He put his hand up for another go despite his advancing years. The other thing we ought to mention is bookmaker restrictions. Long-time listeners will remember our guest Lee Mottershead talking about this almost a year ago, when a white paper from government was supposed to be forthcoming on the matter. And Lee was very worried that the possible inclusion of checks on whether people have sufficient income to support their betting could drive people away from the sport, as a lot of people quite reasonably wouldn't be happy, and indeed don't see why they should provide that kind of financial information to a bookmaker. And obviously it could be really damaging to racing, as a levy on bets is a massively important income stream for the sport. Well, in case people did not notice, the political landscape was a little bit unsettled last year, so the white paper never got published. But we're hearing more and more stories now of people being asked to provide this proof of affordability to their bookmaker anyway. It would seem that the Gambling Commission, which, as far as I can tell, is an unelected body for me, is massively overstepping its remit, pressuring bookies to do this. So, yeah, it's serious stuff, because, we love racing, and fixing the damage that could be caused by a lot of people, many of whom are, or most of whom, are not problem gamblers, they're just normal gamblers. That could be really damaging to the sport. I'm not sure what we can do, but it's definitely not good.
Well, look, I agree with you, Phil. This is a massive issue for racing, but also for individual freedoms. It's important too. How dare I be asked to prove that I have the wherewithal financially to spend money on a perfectly legal activity? Will there be a body asking me to prove that I can afford to go on holiday later in the year, or questioning how much I can spend at my favourite restaurants? For me, it's a slippery slope to Big Brother. Anyway, rant over. We have Rishi Persad on the line. Hi, Rishi. Welcome to Inside the Rails.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Although I was slightly strong-armed at the horse race writers' lunch, but it's a real pleasure to be on. I've heard a lot about Inside the Rails.
I know, that was a little bit crass of me, wasn't it, really? We'd never met before, but I thought, you know what, you can't let these opportunities go. So thank you very much for coming on. And I know you've been busy with the bowls today.
Yes, it is now the 20th year that I've worked at the bowls, the World Indoor Bowls Championships, which takes place on the East Coast, near Yarmouth Racecourse. So it's the big one for World Indoor Bowls, and I enjoy it. It's a crowd that I know quite well, and the players I know very well now. So it's a fun week.
Great. Well, I hope that goes well for you. Now, racing fans will know you from the various channels you've worked on over the years, but you've also worked on many other sports as well: golf, tennis, cricket, the Olympics, to name but a few. How did you get into broadcasting? What's the Rishi Persad story?
It's very opportunistic. I had no ambitions, no intentions to work in broadcasting. It was my ambition to work in sport, to be involved in horse racing primarily, which is the sport that I loved and grew up with, and perhaps one or two others like cricket, which I also enjoy. And I struggled to get a job in horse racing, so it took me ages to. Eventually, I did get a job, and I got an opportunity at a PR company, and they specialised in racing, but also did a few other sports for sponsors. And I think basically I bored my boss there to the point where he had enough of me. And I went away for a month's holiday to Trinidad, because I hadn't been to holiday for ages, and I grew up in Trinidad. And whilst I was away, just the time that the original At the Races was starting up in 2002, and my boss, without me knowing, had written to that At the Races channel, or the bosses that At the Races channel, recommending that they give me a chance. And when I came back from my holiday, it was with a week of screen testing left to do. And I phoned the office to say, shall I come in? And they said, no, not today, but if you could phone this number, these people need to speak to you urgently. So I rang the At the Races people and they said, can you come in for a screen test? I had no idea this was going on. I went in for the screen test on the Friday before Cheltenham 2002. On the Monday, they phoned me back and offered me a job as a presenter / reporter, whatever. I can't remember the exact term of it. But and that's how I started 21 years ago.
So it sounds like the Cheltenham Festival was your first gig, was it?
No. So I went to that Cheltenham Festival just purely as a punter in 2002, primarily because I booked it off to go and watch it, but not because I was working. The first day I ever worked on television was Victoria Cup Day, which was on the Wednesday, the 1st of May at Ascot in 2002. And I was at Ascot as the analyst. Alice Plunkett was the presenter, and Big Mac was doing the betting. So the three of us worked together on the very first day at the races at Ascot in May 2002.
And how did it go?
It went okay, actually. I mean, I was very nervous, but Alice she's a lovely person. So she put me at ease. And Big Mac was a joy to work with. Every time I had the opportunity to work with him over the years, he was always very generous with his time. And I don't think you'll meet too many people who worked with him who would say anything but that about him. And so we had a great time. And if I remember correctly, Rod Millman had a 2-year-old winner called Coconut Penang. And I believe, I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty certain that I tipped it because Alice was very complimentary about me actually tipping a winner in the first 2 races. And there we have it. I think it might be the last winner I tipped.
Oh, I'm sure that's not true. That's interesting you saying about Big Mac because I think the persona that he had for the general public was very different, wasn't it, from people like yourself who've worked with him?
Yeah, he obviously had a character that people on watching on television would have become familiar with. Was obviously loud, which he was. He was loud and he was gregarious, and he had the ability to dominate with his voice. But there was also the other side to him, which was quite caring. He was quite a mentor in some respects. The way that anybody new to the team, when I joined, ended up getting an opportunity with Channel 4 within 6 months of starting on at the races, and he was one of the people who actually offered me advice straight away and suggested, this is what you probably need to do in terms of looking at VTs and doing this sort of prep, etc. He was also very thorough, and he was a really good example. If anybody wanted to see the type of work that you had to put in order to be a success or to feel comfortable when you're on air, then he was that type of person. I mean, anybody would have learned who spent time with it would have learned a great deal in his company.
Now, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast the Horse Writers and Photographers Association awards dinner, which was where we actually met for the first time. I really enjoyed it. It's the first time I've been to it. I thought it was a great event. But I have to say, it did strike me. It was incredibly white and very male-dominated. Let's cut to the chase. Does racing have a problem with diversity and inclusivity, or rather the lack of it?
Well, before I answer that question, I'll ask you, do you think, because if I was to say a comment like you've said, and say it struck you how it was very white, very male-dominated, I think people, like the last time I said something like that, when I did a Josh Apiafi's leading the way, his case studies on diversity in racing, etc., ethnicity in the sport. People had a significant axe to grind with me for saying that. But you saw that. Do you think that's an issue? Before I answer.
I think there is an issue, just in terms of going racing. So I've got a brother-in-law who's from Jamaica, loves his racing, has been in syndicates, and he doesn't beat the drum and go on about it. But we have had many conversations. He's been to Kempton a couple of times, and I've had syndicate runners. He's been there as my guest, and we've had conversations. We were together at Christmas, and just the lack of people from an ethnic background at racing, never mind the participants. Now, I'm not thinking that there's people deliberately stopping people entering it, but I do think there is a bit of an issue there. Yeah.
Well, I agree with you. And the reason why whether I agreed with you or not, I would respect what you said is because you're speaking about it from your point of view through the prism of someone that who's from an ethnic background, who has had questions to ask about it. So that's the basis of my belief that there might be an issue. I've grown up in the sport, and I love racing. And I love the fact that it's given me an opportunity in my life, and I feel like I owe racing a debt. And part of repaying that debt is thinking, how can I make the sport a tiny little bit better? How can I give something back to the sport that's given so much to me? And I think that maybe that there is an opportunity to at least ask the question whether or not it can be different and it can be better. Now, I've had people, when I originally said that we don't do enough to attract people from a diverse ethnic background, when I've said that, I've had colleagues, people who work in the media, people who work as trainers, jockeys, phoning me up to question my motives and why would I say that? Why would I decry racing? And I kept saying to them, I'm not decrying racing. I'm trying to ask a question saying, well, are we not maybe taking advantage of a group of people who might have an interest in racing, but for whatever reason don't? I'll tell you a very brief story that I was part of the Diversity in Racing Steering Group up until the end of last year. But that was in 2022. I left. But at the beginning of it all, in 2017, when it began, we were all brought in, about, I think, 13, 14 of us. And we were all asked to be on the group because everyone who joined that group had something that they felt that they wanted to offer and an observation about of their experience in racing. So I think we met in the middle of the summer. So I took in with me that day, I took in a couple of photos of the promotional material used for Royal Ascot and the Qatar Goodwood Festival, or Gross Goodwood, I couldn't remember what it was at that time. Might have been the Qatar Goodwood Festival already. And Royal Ascot, and I might have taken another photo in. And I held the photos up to the rest of the group, and I said, these are the photos that we are using to promote our sport's greatest events during the summer. And how many people of colour can you see in there? And in total of the photos that I took in, I think there were 8 people, and they were all wearing G4S security jackets. And I said, now, I'm not saying that I look at that and I go, right, if I was a person of colour, I don't want to go racing. I'm just asking you to think like somebody who looks different and who looks like somebody wearing the G4S jacket. Would I want to go into that setting? Not entirely certain that I would. That's it. Just asking the questions. Just ask the questions as to whether or not things might be different. Now, I personally think that maybe if we made it a little bit more representative of what society looks like, as opposed to just maybe what a race course might look like, it might start to shift the balance, however little. It's better we start shifting it in the right direction now than not shift it at all.
Okay. You've started to allude really to what maybe racing can do in terms of promotional material to get people of an ethnic background to racing. I do want to ask the question, though, never mind actually more jockeys, trainers, broadcasters, participants. How do we actually get people from an ethnic background to go racing in the first place? Because as I said, I've chatted to my brother-in-law and he says, yeah, okay, he'll see the paddock commentator, Ken Pitterson, which many people will know, and you'll see Sean Levy. And interestingly, Howard, my brother-in-law, said Sean Levy they never really met, but he sort of almost acknowledged him as if, you're a black person on the race course, and they sort of nodded to each other. Well, that's saying something, isn't it? What can racing do, Rishi, to try and encourage people to go along?
I certainly think racing can present itself a little bit more representative of society. And even if they have to falsify that fractionally, because obviously if you were to take a snapshot of a race course, say, for example, in the winter at Cheltenham, Ascot, Aintree, whatever, it is primarily white and male dominated. I do believe that should you at least give the perception that it's more representative of what modern Britain looks like, that would certainly help. I've always felt that gimmicky things are sometimes fine. You put on different cultures are on show for different race nights and things like that. But I think it's engaging people from all backgrounds into what the sport has to offer, and simple things like the way we dress at the racecourse. So there was a study done and I'm not sure if this has ever been published, but I know it exists. There was a study done of people from an ethnic minority background years ago as to reasons why they were sports fans, they loved sport, and they'd seen racing, but why they didn't go racing. And they felt that attending a racecourse involved getting drunk. They felt that it wasn't a place for them. And they also felt that the people who attended the racecourse, or they didn't, when they, I'm trying to remember the exact phrasing that was behind it, they didn't look like them in the sense that, they didn't dress like them, etc. I'm not saying that we all need to dress up in jeans and white trainers and hoodies or whatever. I think there needs to be some relaxation of the strict principles of racecourse dress, particularly in the summer, where I think it can be relaxed a little bit more because you can look smart without having to wear, top hat and tails, or you can look smart without having to wear a tie and wear, brogues or whatever. You can look smart by just wearing nice, clean clothes. And I think simple things like that allow people to just be more themselves, and you struggle to then fit in. If that's not how you normally conduct yourself, and then you have to go and put yourself through something that you're slightly uncomfortable with, then that's where the issues come. So why would I want to do that? What is it offering me that I really need to do that for? So therefore, my point would be is to offer a setting that makes it comfortable for anyone who wishes to attend. And I hope that, there have been discussions. I'm hoping that is moving forward, and that small steps are going to happen.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's a point very well made. Anyway, changing the subject a little bit, I think your father bred and raced horses, didn't he? Have you ever been involved directly in ownership, and is it something you'd like to get involved with in the future?
Yeah, I've been involved in horses sporadically over the years. I had a share my dad, yes, owned and bred race horses for a long time, and I saw firsthand how quickly money can disappear when things go wrong. It's funny. I remember I got into, or somebody had a go at me on Twitter for suggesting that I had an opinion on how much a couple of owners had spent on buying a horse, and all I said was that it's going to be hard to recoup that money. And somebody decided that that was out of order, and I shouldn't have said that, and then started saying to me that I know nothing about racing and that I don't understand the game. And there was a part of me that wanted to say, listen, I watched My Inheritance completely spent by my father on horses. Obviously, drink was involved as well. He had a great time, my dad, but he spent a lot of money on horses over the years, far too much money on horses over the years. So I was always wary, but I have the bug. So it's something that I want to do. I have done. I had a share in a very good horse back in the day with Mark Johnston called Cuisine. He was pretty good. I've had bits and pieces in horses. I did take a majority share in one a couple of years ago. So Simon Dow is a family friend, and unfortunately, every time he tried to work the horse, do anything with any strain, the horse decided that it just didn't fancy it and would either bleed or go a little bit weak on him, or some issue would come up. And so that sort of went round in circles for 2 years, and I just thought, well, now I know how my dad lost all his money. And unfortunately, that's the only one I've really owned like the majority share. But then I got involved through my brother-in-law, who is Jack Mitchell. He got me involved in the Row Gallery, who he rides for and who sponsor him. And so I've had a few bits and pieces of horses in that syndicate with Tony Elliott and the guys who obviously have a great time. And they had a pretty good season in 2022. So hoping for even better. So, but one day when I have enough money, I'd like to buy a couple of horses, maybe a filly that I can then breed from along the way.
Well, that's exactly what we always hope for out of syndication, that people will start off in syndicates and then progress to owning their own horses. So.
That is so true. That should be the principle of all syndicates. That it is great fun, and obviously it's great to be involved in if you can't afford it, etc. But the dream, I'd love the idea of people having that dream of one day having one on their own, and joy of having your own horse and what that's like, and the pain, it partly makes it as well. So roller coaster ride that it could be.
Absolutely. And whilst we're getting to that position, how crucial do you think the role of syndication is in the future of racing?
Oh, well, obviously I'm slightly biased because I've been involved with that syndicate, the Rogues Syndicate, and the horse that we had with Mark Johnson. It was part of Favourites Racing. There were a couple of friends that I had in with that horse as well, and we had a great time. And even in the days where things didn't go well with the horse, we had each other to share in that as well. So I think syndication is actually a great racing experience, first and foremost, that you have other people to share in the experience. Because I think sharing the experience really helps you want to do it more often, because obviously you form friendships, and those friendships or those bonds, as long as they can be maintained, then hopefully that's going to sustain you through life as much as anything else, and you'll always have that. But for the other reasons that we've kind of alluded to as well, is that we cannot nowadays, especially with the cost of living and how difficult it is to make ends meet for so many people. Yet you have that burning desire to be involved in the sport. You have that burning desire that you want to, climb the ladder in terms of ownership a little bit every now and then. Well, if you can't do it on your own, then join up with other people and do it, because there are lots of people like you. If you're listening to this out there now thinking, I'd like to do it, I'm promising you there'll be, hundreds of other people who think the same, thinking, I'd like to do it. I'd like to have a go. I'd like to have a share, however small it may be. There's something there for you. I'm obviously very privileged to be on the racecourse so often, and you see some of the syndicates celebrating their big moments and what it means. However small their share is, the owner's share, that particular owner's share in whatever horse, it doesn't detract from how much joy they get from their horse.
Well, I have to say, that sounds the perfect advert for syndication. Well done, Rishi. We knew we could count on you. No, that's lovely. Lovely to hear that you're a big fan of it. Anyway, thank you very much for being on Inside the Rails. Just before you go, we always like to ask our guests this question, bit of a tricky one. If there were three things, and only three things, please, that you could change for the better in British racing, what would they be?
Well, I think two of them are pretty obvious. I think prize money and fixtures.
Yep.
I think the reason why I put those two almost together is the correlation between the two of them. Less racing, more prize money is clearly an equation that makes more sense than more racing, less prize money.
Yeah.
Therefore, there needs to be a bit of finessing in terms of who controls the fixtures, but we're a long way from that.
Yeah.
Hopefully, with the new governance structure that the BHA have agreed at the end of 2022, there might be a little bit more power to change things for the better. But obviously, with the poor prize money, you see jockeys leaving to try their luck in different countries. Good horses are going. Trainers are having to give up because they can't. One of the most upsetting things I saw last year was a tremendous trainer like Chris Wall.
Yeah, we touched upon that in the podcast, actually. Yeah, very upsetting.
He's a great trainer. He's been wonderful over the years, and he's had to give up. So you're seeing Tyler Hurd and Grace McEntee, etc. They've just gone to America. So prize money is massive, and I think the fixture list doesn't help prize money, and I think there needs to be a bit more control over those. So I think those two things go together. And the one other thing that I would really like to make a difference with racing is, I think that racing's marketing brains, marketing gurus, I think they go about selling the sport to the wrong people. And I understand why you'd want racecourses, for example, would want to sell a great day out of the races and pile as many people in to get on the lash, have a great time, bring lots of guys and girls who will have a great time, etc. But are they going to come back for racing? No. They're going to come back to have a nice time, and they don't show an interest in racing. The future of our sport relies on younger people. The majority of people that I know in racing, and perhaps you can tell me whether it's the same for you or not, get involved in the sport when they're young, whether it's through mum, dad, grandparents, uncles, aunts, whatever. And once you're engaged with that youngster from a young age, or once you take a youngster racing, you engage with them and you actually talk to them about it. And you show them the things that you know and learn, and help them understand what's going on, and make that effort to help them understand it. then you're creating the next generation of racegoers. But at the moment, we're not creating the next generation of racegoers. We're not doing it enough. There are a few projects that are doing it, but we're not doing it enough. At the moment, we're creating people to come to the races and have a nice time.
That's lovely, Rishi. The prize money gets echoed by everybody, as you probably guessed. But interesting, your third point about the marketing, that was some refreshing ideas. So thank you very much. Look, thank you again for joining us on Inside the Rails. I hope the rest of the week goes well with the bowls and indeed the rest of your sports broadcasting this year.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you very much. I'm so glad that I went to that HWPA lunch and had the opportunity to meet you and to come on here.
Well, thank you. And apologies again. It was slightly strong-arm tactics, but really appreciated. Thank you. Well, Phil, another lovely, insightful guest. He took a very measured, well-argued position on diversity, I thought.
Yes, it was great to chat with Rishi. I thought he came across really well, especially in the diversity discussion. And yeah, I'm very jealous that he seems to have met a lot of my sporting heroes at different stages of his career. Anyway, can you believe that next month will be our March podcast and the 2023 Cheltenham Festival will be almost upon us?
Wow.
Where does the time go? Yeah, listeners will hopefully be pleased to hear that we'll be back with more chat and hopefully a topical guest ahead of Cheltenham. In the meantime, I'd ask everyone that's listening to support us by following the podcast and, just as importantly, by telling your friends about us. And of course, you can engage with us on Twitter. Our handle there is @InsideTheRails. And if you need support or guidance on joining a syndicate, do feel free to get in touch.
And I believe that's already happened.
It has, twice in fact, in the last month. One person contacted us through Twitter looking for a syndicate as a Christmas present for his dad. I gave him some suggestions and he actually messaged me at Christmas to say his dad was excitedly reading all about his new horse from Old Gold Racing that he had a share of as his Christmas present. And later in January, the father of someone I know through a business network contacted me. And as a result of our chat, he bought a share with Grange Park Racing. So I'm sure they'll both have a great experience.
I'm sure they will. I mean, Francesca Cumani is associated with Old Gold Racing, and you and I know Alan Crombie from Grange Park Racing very well. So, yes, I'm sure they'll have a great time. Well, that just leaves me to thank co-host Phil Boyle from BG Racing, our special guest broadcaster Rishi Persad, producer Callum Ronan from Callum Ronan Creative, and of course you, the listeners. The whip debate, a bloodstock scandal, and people checking up on us as to whether we can afford to have a flutter. But there's good news. Syndicates are having a fabulous time on the racecourse, and even in this day and age of fierce competition, they're working together. Syndication is the future of British racing. Have you thought of joining a syndicate? This is Simon Double from Solaria Racing saying goodbye.